Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Building a Winning Bid, How to Respond to Requests for Proposals by Tom Sant from Hyde Park Partners. We're just waiting for a few of you to join, so we're going to be starting momentarily. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Just while we're waiting for people to come in, I'll introduce myself. My name is Sarah Condi, and I'm going to be moderating the webinar today. A little background on me, I've been an MBO for over 5 years, and during that time I've done a lot. I've mentored and advised over 250 individual consultants, managed dozens of Fortune 100 client accounts. I've managed a team of business managers and client enrollment managers, developed and executed multiple training programs, and now I'm in a role called Consultant Services Advisor, and I love this role. It's my job to respond to requests from independents who are curious about MBO service offerings, and what we typically do is schedule a consultation appointment where we walk through the consultant's background, their needs, and sometimes we'll run estimates to help determine if MBO is the right fit. So that's a little background on me. I guess we can go to the next slide now. Just a quick high-level overview of MBO Partners and what we do. So our mission statement is to make it easy for independent consultants and their clients to work together. And so what that really means is that for the individual IC, we're an alternative to self-incorporation. And we enable independents to run their practices through us by plugging into our infrastructure, and by doing that, a byproduct of that is we take care of all of the administrative items that typically are outsourced to several different vendors, like, for example, professional liability insurance coverage, invoicing, tax withholding, expense process, access to benefits, etc. Now let's go to the next slide. So for some housekeeping items, as we're getting ready to go here for the webinar setup, you can see the controls are listed here. If you have a question, you can enter it. We're going to be taking questions throughout the presentation, and we'll address them at the end. Tom will be answering questions at the end. And any questions that we don't get answered, Tom will be following up in email with you. And also, please keep in mind, we will be emailing the slide deck and a recorded copy of the entire webinar to everyone who's registered, and that'll be in about the next week or so. So if you miss something or want to learn more, just rest assured that we are going to provide that to you. If we look at the next slide, you can, anybody who's really into Twitter and wants to follow us that way, the hashtag is MBOWeb, and you can submit your questions and comments there as well. We'll move on to the next slide. So now it is my sincere pleasure to introduce you to today's presenter, Tom Sant. And, as you can see, he is a highly acclaimed author of several books, including Persuasive Business Proposals. He was named America's foremost expert on proposal writing by American Management Association. He was listed as one of the world's top 10 sales trainers by Selling Power magazine, has over 25 years of experience in this industry, over $30,000 in winning proposals. So, let's just say you probably want to listen to what he has to say on this topic. And I know that I'm really excited, and I hope you are as excited as I am to gain some of his knowledge in his area of expertise here. So with all of that being said, I'm now going to hand it over to Tom.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be able to share some ideas to help my fellow consultants and independents figure out how to respond to these RFPs we get, these requests for proposals. Our agenda today is to look at some basic issues. Why do we get them? Why do people issue RFPs? And I'm sure most of us know, but an RFP stands for Request for Proposal. Sometimes in Europe it's called an Invitation to Tender, or ITT. Sometimes you see requests for quotation, which is a little more oriented towards the pricing. But these are all documents that people use in order to issue requests for services, sometimes for products as well. But I think in our domain it's more about providing professional services and how we can respond to these effectively. A few things we need to be aware of before we even start to respond to one. Just some ideas so we drive out the waste and avoid spending time and effort on a non-starter. Then I'm going to go through the actual parts of an RFP, at least the parts that matter the most, and show you how to do them as effectively as possible. And then a few final thoughts, some ideas about formatting and about dealing with the increasing use of electronic spreadsheets and these submission tools that you see purchasing departments using more and more. So that's where we're headed, but as Sarah said, happy to take questions. So if you got something that pops up, please use the chat box or use Twitter, and we'll get to them at the end, and we'll make sure that if we don't cover your question during our session, that I respond to you directly via email. All right, well, let's start with the first question. Why do these things even exist? I mean, for a lot of us, these are sort of the bane of our existence. We end up spending hours responding to them and sometimes aren't sure if what we're doing is even communicating effectively to the client, if we're getting the right message across, is it working? So let's go back. RFPs, requests for proposals, the formal kind of bid documents that we traditionally think of with detailed questions and specific requirements and so forth. Those really began with the federal government, U.S. federal government, and it arose as part of the response to all the corruption and cronyism that was going on, which was leading to massive amounts of waste and fraud and really bad situation. So in the 1880s, 1890s, there were a number of civil service reforms that were introduced to try to improve transparency and to make it a little more of an honest and even playing field for people who wanted to sell either products or services to the government. Well, with the Depression and the rise of massive public works programs, it became even more important because we went from a lot of deals to a huge number of deals, and the federal government became the dominant force in the U.S. economy. And then with World War II, of course, it just got even more so, and the Cold War, especially in the areas of technology and aerospace and so on. So it just became the way our government does business. And by extension, it was picked up by state and local governments, by school districts, public health entities. So it just became a kind of a dominant mode. The goal, I mean, obviously, it's all about trying to be fair, trying to be objective and transparent. And sometimes there's a social agenda. I mean, it's possible that through legislation and through purchase requirements, for example, the federal acquisition requirements are a whole book of guidelines, but the government can implement policies that lead to equal employment opportunity, to supporting minority-owned or women-owned business enterprises, for encouraging business development in economically depressed areas, and so on. So there may be a secondary agenda sometimes. One of the things that may appeal to some of you is the fact that many federal RFPs have a set-aside for small business. So a large company, a Lockheed Martin or a Booz Allen or whomever, may end up needing to partner with small companies, including even solo practitioners in certain areas. So if you have an expertise which would play into a certain kind of contract, being a subcontractor to one of the big players, it's important for them so they meet their small business requirements, and it could be important for you as a way of getting in on the contract. In that case, you won't be responding, of course, to the entire RFP. You'll simply be providing content about your own programs or your own expertise as a small portion of a much bigger bid. So that's what happened. I mean, these go way back. One of the interesting documents in the Library of Congress, just kind of a side note, is a proposal that the Wright brothers wrote in response to a request from the U.S. Department of Army, as it was called back then, to build and sell airplanes which could be used by the Army. And this goes back to, the 19-teens, and they were writing out a response to a request for proposal. And they actually didn't get it. They were pretty angry because here they invented the airplane, they didn't get the contract. Oh well, they probably needed some consultants to help them, right? Well, what about in the private sector? Some of you are working with small to medium-sized businesses. You're trying to sell into the private sector, and yet you're still being required to respond to these. Now, they don't have the same requirements. They aren't mandated to use federal acquisition standards and so on. But what's happened in a lot of cases is sort of a trickle-down effect. Because of the power of the federal government as a buying agent in our economy, other companies begin to imitate it. So big companies imitate what they're made to do by the federal government, and then medium-sized companies imitate what the big companies make, and so on. And so it just trickles on down. The other thing that's happened, too, and especially over the last 25 years, what people are buying is so much more complex that they really need to be able to see it in writing. You know, that it's not enough to just sit and chat. I remember when my father was in sales, he was very successful in his field. He ended up becoming vice president of sales for a large corporation. But you know, when he would talk to me about what I do for a living, he would say, Tom, I don't understand it because I never wrote a proposal in my life. You know, I closed million-dollar deals, and we would go in the bar and we would sit and have a few drinks and sketch out the terms on a napkin, and we'd walk out, and that'd be the deal. We'd shake hands, we're done. I don't know why people have to do all this rigmarole you're teaching them how to do. You know, and of course the appropriate response, I guess, is thanks to the support, Dad. But in the meantime, times have changed, and we probably have to recognize that it isn't going to happen that way anymore. Part of the reason it's changed is that the whole area of procurement and purchasing has become much more professional. There are standards in place. People are trained in how to make smart buying decisions for the companies they represent. And one of the things they do is they request that vendors put things in writing. Now, it's worth noting that besides, you know, all those positive things, there's a couple of maybe not so positive reasons that companies request proposals in the form of an RFP. They may be looking for you to give them free consulting. If you write up a proposal in response to their RFP, which is extremely detailed, you may have given away the farm. Because for most of us, what we're selling is our intellectual capital. In some cases, you know, if you're in accounting, for example, you may tell them how the law works, or you may give them a strategy on tax minimization, but until you actually do the work for them, it's not going to help them. But for some of us, you know, I'm in that boat. If I give away too much, I'm giving away the contract, and they can theoretically do it on their own. Now, a lot of folks won't. I've very seldom had this happen where somebody's tried to use a RFP as a way of extracting information or getting free consulting. The other thing that does happen, though, and you want to be aware of this, is sometimes they'll issue an RFP and they don't intend to hire you. They have no intention whatsoever of hiring you. What they really are hoping is that somebody will come in with some crazy lowball price so they can go to their current provider and beat them up and say, look, I've got 3 offers here that are cheaper than you, so you got to lower your price. And it's a negotiating tactic. And so you were used essentially as a stalking horse, but they had no intention of hiring you. It's not a good thing. You can kind of smell these when they happen. If you got a last-minute request from the customer, if they won't meet with you and discuss what they really need and what they're trying to accomplish, then it's possible they don't really view you as a serious provider and they're not willing to really do business with you. So anyway, that's what's going on. That's why people are issuing them. It's kind of ingrained into our business climate now, and we have to accept that and just make the best of it.